Everybody. This session is about processing steps, an ISO standard that is not published by now, so ISO is working on that. I'm doing this session together with Réne from Axaio. I'm Dietrich von Seggern from Callas software, and we have three parts in this session. The first, I'd like to introduce you into what actually is processing steps. So I always found this name a little bit confusing because processing steps is pretty much everything that I do in production. So what actually is processing steps? And then we want to make it practical. So we want to show our tools, Réne, MadeForLayers and MadeForPrint from axaio, and I will show you pdfToolbox. So it's a little bit of a workflow. So Réne works in this demonstration in a creative agency, and I'll be working in a prepress department somewhere, and we want to take advantage of processing steps information. And then in the third part, we want to give you an overview about all the features in our products that are related to processing steps. So, first part, what is processing steps? In the beginning and the main thing of processing steps is metadata. Technically metadata that is associated with objects in the PDF file, and it comes all from packaging. So I have here, and these images are all taken from the standard text. So these I didn't create them themselves, so you will find them in the standard. There is a packaging, a sample packaging, and then usually what a prepress department would receive, there is not just the print stuff in here, there is additional stuff, so there is creasing information, cutting information, there are dimensions, or there is a legend somewhere, or there's braille information, or maybe varnish or white and several other things. So there are several things, several information available in my PDF file that is not related to the print process. And so processing steps actually means any steps that are related to processing the file, but not to the actual print process. So anything else beyond printing.
It's actually just
a
legal correction, because I was one of the people that made that stuff.
Okay.
Originally it was made non-printing contours, because we were talking about non-printing stuff, but we moved to processing steps, and one of the reasons is that the things that you have on the screen here are not only non-print, because varnish,
right.
So that was the extension. That's why we have to move away from non-print.
Right. Yeah. So it's all processing, and then yes, white definitely is related to printing. Varnish is a border case, but still processing steps, of course, is from its name. It's general. So. And I wouldn't say that it's a bad name. I just say, to me, it seemed to be confusing in the beginning.
Yeah.
But so now I think everybody understands it. So at least there are a few less people being confused on Earth, so which is a good thing. And we try to move forward. And I believe so. Since you say you were involved in the initial establishment and the work on processing steps, I think you have been involved in the Ghent Workgroup, so the whole thing has been invented by the Ghent PDF Workgroup. It came from there. It is published as a specification, so it can be downloaded today, and also, I don't know, for almost a year from the Ghent Workgroup website as a Ghent Workgroup specification, and the Ghent Workgroup has given it to ISO and had at the same time written a warning here on their website, so that whoever downloads it or builds implementations based on this Ghent Workgroup specification should be very careful, because currently it's at ISO, and there is being work done at ISO on the specification. And as of today, nobody really exactly knows what changes will take place. But being involved in this meeting, I will tell you a little bit about what is to be expected from the ISO standard once it is published. So currently it's in this, so that means it's pretty mature, but it's not published. So now switching from the Ghent workgroup specification on processing steps to the ISO standard that is being worked on, that is currently in this. Other than the Ghent workgroup specification, this will be divided in two parts. The one part is a general part that defines rules for establishing metadata for layers. Okay, I think I forgot to mention that. All these additional stuff that I have in my PDF file. So for instance, let's go one step back here. All this information like the jet legend or the cut line or the white form, all this has to be put on a layer. So each one is on a different layer, and so that is done today in packaging. But there are no standard names for these layers. So there is no standard that says the white form needs to be on a layer that has the name white. And also that wouldn't work very well because in Germany we use weiß instead of white. And and a cut line could be cutting or could be die line or whatever. So there are several names, and that makes it difficult for devices to interoperate with each other. So it would of course be nice for a creator to use just the same information as a processor of the file to be able to automatically process that PDF file. And then you use layers and you use standardized metadata in order to define what role this particular layer plays in your PDF file. And in the ISO standard 19593, there is a general part which defines how this metadata has to be incorporated into the PDF file and what rules are possible between such layers. And in the second part, and I will talk about these rules later on, in the second part, it defines how to use this instrument, this methodology inside of packaging. And it is expected or hoped or whatever by ISO that future parts of the standard may apply the same rule set to different print products. I don't know, for booklets or whatever. So, okay, as I've said, this is currently this draft international standard. It will most probably go into FDIS, which means if we have a meeting by end of this month, if there are no major things will show up, and I don't expect that, then that will go into FDIS. There will be a final voting on it, and then it is going to be published in 2018. Okay, now what actually is in the standard, and this applies to both, to the Ghent PDF workgroup specification as well as to ISO. There are no changes here. I've talked about metadata. I said we have in the processing steps PDF file, we have layers, and each layer has standardized metadata, and that metadata means I have 7 different groups. So all my information is in seven different groups. Structural has like all the cut lines and teasing and everything, and I will show that later on. Then there are dimensions, braille information, legend, positions, white, and varnish. So these are my groups. And 2 of these groups have, if you want, subgroups or what is called types. So have more structure below the group name. And the by far most complex one is structural, which has, I think, 23 different types. So all the other ones are much easier. 23 different ones, so, and I have just underlined a few of them because I think if I read these ones, then I pretty much understand what is in structural, in my processing steps structural group. There is like cutting, creasing, information drilling, gluing, foil stamping, embossing, perforating, lead information, varnish, folding, punching, stapling. So everything, most of it having to do with the finishing process. And of course, the gluing would be information, important information also for the printing, because then I don't want to print where the gluing is going on. So just to complete the picture, this is all I have about concrete metadata. So what names, what strings are can be used in this metadata. Dimensions, braille, legend, white, and varnish doesn't have any types, and positions has hologram, barcode, content area, coding, marking, and imprinting. So these are all strings that are predefined and may be used in metadata in a processing steps PDF file, with one exception. Well, actually not just one. Yeah. A few more things, so then I think then you've got all the complete picture. This is the second point here. It is also possible if you say, okay, I want to use processing steps, but there is no way to use any of the predefined strings. Then you may also introduce your own. So it is allowed to use custom values for groups and for types, if you think that makes sense. Of course, if you want to be interoperable with somebody else, you would have to discuss that beforehand. But it is allowed in the standard. Also, maybe good to know if you have two different layers in your PDF file, and both are, I don't know, for instance, related to the white form, you may attach the same metadata to two layers in your PDF file. And then just additionally, so how would a processing steps PDF file interoperate with a device that is not aware of the processing steps standard? So basically, as any other PDF file. So for any PDF processor that doesn't know anything about processing steps, the file will just work. The processor will ignore the metadata that is associated with the layers. And so this is also not, there is no mention of this metadata in PDF 2.0. And that, I mean, the reason there, I believe, is that processing steps by now is not in the ISO standard, so it may change in PDF 2.1, for instance, and then there will be the metadata structures that are defined in processing steps may also be mentioned in PDF 2.1. Okay? So that was more or less what is in the Ghent PDF Workgroup specification as well as in the ISO standard. And it is by no means likely that this is going to change in the published ISO standard. Now, what are the differences? In the PDF, in the Ghent Workgroup specification, there is a half A4 page that defines rule for how layers relate to each other, which kind of objects are allowed for a layer. For instance, may a cut line or the layer for a cut contour, may this layer have images on it? Usually doesn't make sense because a cutter cannot interpret an image into a cut contour. And in the Ghent Workgroup specification, there is a little bit of a specification for that, and this is much more extensive in the ISO standard. So in the ISO standard, there is a definition about what actually is a print surface. So which area of a PDF file is the actual print surface. So in this case, it would be we are humans, so we all understand this. So this would be pretty much what is green here, but in the ISO standard, there is a definition of everything that is inside of structural cutting plus structural bleed. So these two areas, or the areas defined by objects on these two layers, that define the actual print surface of the printed product. And then there are provisions on which objects may occur on or may overlap with this print surface. So, for instance, a cut contour definitely may overlap with the print surface, and the white contour, of course, as well. But a legend may not. A legend must not overlap with the print surface. And then there are also rules about what type of objects may occur on a layer. So, for instance, a layer describing paths, and then it is defined what layers are defining paths, like the cutting and so forth. What objects are allowed there? So, images or filled vector objects, those not. So, there is a definition about that, and the same for surfaces, like for gluing or for a white form, what kind of objects are allowed on these layers. And the same similarly for objects, for layers describing paths or surfaces. And then there is one thing here, for any such layers, no clipping paths are allowed. So none of the objects. So in PDF you may have a clipping path, and there is if there is an active clipping path, anything that would be rendered or painted outside of the clipping path would just not be visible on the PDF file. And any content on processing steps layers that is for path or surface must not be limited by any clipping path. And that is actually really a major requirement, because from a PDF point of view, it's really difficult to find out whether an object is clipped or not. This is understandable. I mean, there were many discussions at ISO whether we really should make this enforcement into the standard, because it will make it more difficult to implement the standard. But in the end, the majority was in favor of this requirement, and now most likely there will be in the standards. And there are some other things that are much more easy to achieve. So also patterns, tag 3 fonts, and text in rendering mode 3, which basically means invisible text, are also not permitted on any of these layers, which are rather technical.
But they are allowed in the content.
They are allowed in the print content. So to summarize this a little bit, the most important part of the standard is the same in Ghent Workgroup as well as in ISO, and that is the metadata hierarchy. But I would say, so I would describe the thing that has happened at ISO, that the whole thing has evolved from a merely metadata standard to something else, that in addition, where major parts of the standards are all talking about how objects on processing steps layers interrelate with each other, and what kind of objects are allowed there. So, and the reasoning behind it, as I see it, is that the committee more or less decided to protect current workflows, because the current devices that interpret a cut contour and create a tool for apply the actual cutting, these are confused by clipping paths, and therefore these tools have kind of be protected by the standard by simply disallowing clipping paths on these layers, or being active on these layers. So as an alternative, it would have been possible to say, okay, we enforce these devices to be more intelligent in the future and become able to differentiate between a cutting path, a clipping path, and another path in a PDF file, but that will not take place, so that is not the case in the processing step standard. And to complete this, what we show to you in a minute, based with our products, the axaio products and the callas products, that is all based on the Ghent Workgroup specification, meaning it's all about the metadata, and in the future, when the ISO standard will be available, we will also be able to evaluate a file whether all the processing steps metadata conforms to the requirements, or the objects in the PDF file conform to all requirements of the ISO standards. And that will most likely happen in pdfToolbox 10. Yeah. So I guess that was the general part for processing steps. Any questions so far? So then I guess René will create me a nice packaging.
So we at axaio, for a long time have a tool called MadeForLayers, which will expand the layer options that InDesign have. And for now, I'm trying to do something like being a designer or layouter, and while creating my document, which has a lot of layers, or some layers, and I want to define those in conformation with the processing steps. So in this case, I do have a layer which is called legend, which, if you see, I have my legend here, and it's barcode. And I also have some kind of cutting line, but I do not have a layer which is called cutting or die line or whatever. And if I just make those layers invisible, I see the layer with the name DE layout. That's the one which is having the cut lines on it. But any further workflow system might not know that. So I just enable the layers and go back to my MadeForLayers product. And I do have the same layers like in InDesign, but I have an additional option to edit those layers. And here I do have a processing steps metadata group where I can set all the processing steps metadata which Dietrich mentioned. So in this case, I have the cut line or cutting layers. So I go to structural and set it to cutting. And it's just saved to the document. And I also have the legend, which I want to, it's already set up, but I could also change that. So I set that as a legend, which is obvious because of the name. And the same goes for the barcode, where I said it's in the positions and barcode. So I just set up all the layer metadata. I could go on, but I think I leave it for now.
So in many cases, you would use this information in order to indicate a position on the page where later on a barcode will go in
So in this case,
production of the PDF file.
So in this case, I already have the barcode placed on both pages. Same goes for the legend. And with the metadata set, any workflow tool which is capable of the processing steps could enable only layers which has barcode on it. And Dietrich will later on show in pdfToolbox how to check those layers if they are conform to the whatever should be on there. So on Friday we released MadeForLayers with processing steps metadata, so you can just download and try it out. And together with that, we also have an update of Made2Print, which is also exporting the processing steps metadata from the InDesign document to the PDF. So there's just one thing you have to be aware of is that you export a layered PDF. So if you export an InDesign document without layers, it won't have any metadata on the layers. So you should be using an InDesign preset with those layers, and I just export now. It's just finished and hand it over to Dietrich in the pdfToolbox. And I think you have just give it to you.
Trial license will expire.
Yeah, but it should be.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, okay, might be some tauschen. Okay, now I'm for 10 minutes or so, I will be working in a prepress department, and I've just received this file from my customer, and I know he's a good one. He's using processing steps in order to make my life easier, and I can just double check that by opening the Layer Explorer in pdfToolbox. And it shows me that there are many layers here, and a few of them have processing steps metadata. So I can see this in parentheses, and I can double click on that, and it shows me the metadata. So, and again, in the structural group, we have 23 different types. And again, similar to what Réne has just showed. So I have the same information over here. I could as well create a custom group and say my group or whatever, and change or type in my custom processing steps metadata. But usually that doesn't make sense, so I stay away from that, and I just hit the cancel button. And I see here a few of these layer names have parentheses in their names, so it might be confusing. This master here is not processing steps information, but the structural cutting is, the positions, barcode is, and the legend is. So I can interactively inspect that, and of course I can also change the visibility of the layers here, but yeah. Okay, I will have. This is a question, or?
Yes, I have a question.
Yes, please.
In case everything is correct, defined as structural, as printable, and stuff like that,
Yeah.
does a RIP recognize that as non-printing object, printing object, overprinting?
That is a good question. That depends on the RIP. I mean, a RIP that is processing steps aware could do so, but as far as I know, most of the RIPs as of today are not, so you would have to make sure that these layers are not visible if your RIP is able to take that into account, and if not, you would have to remove all these layers with the content that is on them. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And that is...
But for this case, sorry to interrupt,
Yeah.
but it might be easier not, I mean, to use this workflow just by the naming convention of the layer, not the actual metadata, since it's not recognizable.
Right, it is. So maybe I'm just about to answer that question, because that was just the interactive part of what you can do with pdfToolbox. You also can okay. You can also check for processing steps information, and I'm going to do so. And I have prepared a profile here, and that tells me which processing steps layers are present in my PDF file. So there is a legend, positions, and structural, and I can drill into this layer here in order to find out more detail, and tells me here structural cutting. So in the results dialog, wherever a layer information is displayed, also the processing steps information is available. And I have also created 2 checks here that allow me to possibly identify issues in my processing steps information. So there is one here that says there is color on the processing steps barcode. I can double click on it, and then the object here is indicated. So the barcode is red, and I just set up a check that tells me if on the processing steps layer for barcode, if there is color, I want to see an error. And I've done similarly here with the cutting layer, where I said, whenever there is anything on a cutting layer that is not a line, give me an error. And I have 450 matches in here, and that is all this green information at the top of the page here, which obviously is text. In my opinion, shouldn't occur on a cutting layer and is therefore flagged as a problem.
Will the Ghent working group or callas provide sets of this processing step checker?
You mean whether we can build this profile that I built for the session built into pdfToolbox? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, we definitely will do that for pdfToolbox 10 once ISO is has published it. So that would be the plan. Yes.
Those tags that you find through the file for the objects that you go around, are those specifically named, or are they going to be able to be translated with an agreement between the customer and whoever has how those tags are made?
No, they're standard tags. So you must not I don't know, use Struktur instead of structural. So it is you have to use these texts.
So it's name specific.
Yeah, because otherwise it wouldn't be interoperable. So
But for the metadata, because basically what we found out, and that's why we moved to metadata, is that the layers they're not localized, and people want to use their own names. That's why we're using the metadata, where the layer can be named whatever you want for the diagram, for example. But in the processing steps, metadata, it has to follow the structure, is the naming convention.
yeah.
But if the way the metadata is named, how it's conveyed or transferred from file to file or from application to application, based on how it's structured within the XMP or the XML set, right?
No,
No,
this metadata doesn't have to do anything with XMP. So it's really it's an additional tag, if you want, that has been invented by Ghent PDF Workgroup and taken over by ISO. It's a tag that is associated with a layer object in the PDF file, and these tags allow you to insert 2 strings, and by that they are becoming metadata for that layer. And and they are different from the name. And as he has, just for instance, you may use whatever name you want for the layer name for the cut line, but you have to, if you want to, to work in accordance with the processing step standard, you have to use these strings for the metadata. Okay? So I very briefly want to go into this here, just that you see how that works internally. I have a couple of custom checks here, and I have information for all the processing steps groups. Maybe just go into one of them very briefly. And it just says there is a processing steps checks, and that finds out whether the processing steps metadata is contained in the list. And here I have got dimensions. And more interesting maybe is this one, where I'm using the same check, and this time it's not just the group, it's also the type, structural cutting, and I have combined that with another check that finds me any objects on the page that are not aligned. So, and thereby I'm combining, so the first item here finds me any objects that are on structural cutting, and the second one restricts that to objects that are not lines. And then I identify all objects that maybe are wrong on this structural cutting layer.
Is it but way different if I want to check for objects, depending on their usage, I have to create individual checks and then I have to add with the requirement is this an object of a certain process
Yeah.
step to each of those individual checks.
Yeah, but by now you have to build that manually. I mean, we could publish a preliminary thing, but because these requirements are still being worked on at ISO, we hesitating to do that because it's not final. What's that?
But it would be great to have the possibility to define a set of checks and limit all of those checks to processing step objects.
Ah, you mean?
For example, if I want to check for thin lines, or if an object is just a line, and if I have multiple processing steps and I want to know for each processing step if it's just a single line, I would end up with tons of profiles.
Oh, I will. No, you can. What you can do is not contained in list, and that would give you. And then you would have to enter all the groups, so you would have to enter 7 group names, but that's it. And then you have a check that finds you all objects that are not on any processing steps layer.
Yes, but we also can have the other way around. I want to know if a line is, what type of lines are used in whatever processing step, and I cannot combine all of those in one check. I would have to make a different check for each processing step for that object. Limit too, like limit inside the trim box. It would be nice to have such a overall. Yeah,
but I mean, I will have to look into that, but I think you can do that as well with is contained in list, and then you have all objects that are on any processing steps layer. They already tell me that I have to hurry, so. And I just want to show you one thing. There are not just checks, there is also fix-ups. So I can, if I would want to, because my RIP doesn't support processing steps, I can also make them all invisible, for instance, in this case, or I could even remove the stuff that is on these layers. And that is taking place by means of a thing that we have introduced to layer-related fix-ups. In this case, I have a fix-up that switches a layer on or off. I'm switching to off. And then I have a new checkbox here that basically tells me the thing that you have previously identified by a layer name, you can now identify by means of processing steps metadata. And I have activated that new checkbox, and then I have used the dot star from a regex that would find me any processing steps metadata. And by setting it up in this way, this fix-ups simply switches all layers that are having processing steps metadata to being invisible. I guess that was the practical part. Any questions to this one? Because then it's your turn again.
Right? No.
Should I do that?
Okay. Yeah. So as for now, processing steps metadata is supported in MadeForLayers in the current version 1.3. And you can set and adjust the processing steps metadata. And in Made2Print, it's supported in version 2.7, which is simply to export the processing steps metadata to the PDF.
Oh, that's me already?
No, that's the MadeForLayers, just as you have seen it. It has the processing steps metadata group, and
Okay, now it's me.
now it's you.
Okay, briefly an overview about what is possible in pdfToolbox 9 with regards to processing steps. Basically, it's possible to apply, to set a processing step meter, to check for it, to adjust, and to report it. And I think we've covered most of that, so that we have already seen, so that you interactively can view and modify the metadata. A brief overview about all the checks that are related to processing steps metadata. So there is one that allows you to finding out whether there is processing steps metadata. You can find out whether processing steps metadata uses custom values. You can find out whether processing steps metadata is used for the same metadata is used for more than one layer, which would be perfectly fine with the standard. And there is a flexible one, and this one was the one I was using in the checks that I have shown you. There is processing steps check, and that can be combined with a particular processing steps metadata and will then be defined. And can be combined as I have shown in my example. And there are a few fix-ups. This one we already covered in the presentation. There is another one that would allow you to add processing steps metadata to a layer. So if you always receive from a customer a PDF file that doesn't have processing steps, and you want to associate certain type of processing as metadata with that, you can do that, or you can modify a layer name for metadata for a layer that is identified by means of processing steps metadata, and you can as well put objects on a processing steps layer if you want to move additional objects onto there. What we don't have yet, but what we will be working on is, because I found out during preparation for this presentation that it makes sense to remove objects from a processing steps layer. So if you, for instance, this text in the example that we had, this green text, where I believe it shouldn't be on that layer, to make it possible to remove that from the processing steps layer, structure cutting. Okay, that we have seen, so we have all the information available in the result dialog without doing anything about that. And that is the summary of this session. There is processing steps, is around and published for, I think, at least a couple of months, if not years, by the Ghent Workgroup specification. Ghent Workgroup has given it over to ISO. ISO working on an ISO standard for that. And then there is metadata in order to allow for interoperability between devices, mainly in packaging. And ISO, other than the Ghent Workgroup specification, defines additional rules for objects and interdependencies between layers. The creation of the metadata and its interactive variation is already supported in the axaio products as well as in callas pdfToolbox. The new requirements that are part of ISO will be taken or will be implemented into our solutions in due time after the standard has been published. Anything else? Then, thank you very much for attending this presentation. Any questions? Thank you.